All right.
Oh, might have accidentally muted yourself there, Dylan.
To this week's live office hours. Not sure why it muted me there, but we're good. I think so. That's good. Casey, how's everything going, man?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, the weather is cooling off a little bit. I'm a big fall guy myself. I love a good hoodie. So
Yes.
so yeah, things are trending in that direction. And yeah, Q4 and Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all those things are approaching. So a lot of folks trying to get set up and onboarding
Yeah.
calls. So yeah, looking forward to the conversation today. It'd be it's always interesting to see the questions we get on a weekly basis and dive in deeper there.
Yeah, 1,000%. It is pumpkin spice season, so I've stockpiled tons of K cups of pumpkin spice coffee because I am that guy. Can't get enough of it. So very exciting. Yeah, Q4 is around the corner. I'm starting to see a lot more people talk about it on Twitter specifically. That's where I'm at least the most active. But we've been talking about it for months, right? I think the earlier you can start to think about these things, the better. Certainly, see Ryan jumping in here. Hey, how's it going? But yeah, so live office hours, if you're new to this, basically there is no structure. The structure really is you give us questions, we answer them. So those questions could be related to Aura, could be related to repricing as a whole, or even just anything selling. Like, what are you struggling with, right? What do you need help with? We've been around the world in this space for, gosh, I think I've been in this space probably a little over a decade at this point. Well, definitely over a decade because Aura's coming up on 9-ish years old, or the company is, should I say. And I was a seller for a number of years prior to that. So Gina, appreciate you joining us. How's it going? How's it going? Lots of people jumping in. I dig it. Yeah, so a lot of things are changing. I gave a presentation. I won't harp on this because I did this last week, but I know there's a bunch of new people jumping in right now. Just in terms of like how we think as a company, because a lot of people don't really fathom what we're doing with the team size we have. So we're 5 people right now in total in the company. We don't have VAs. We don't outsource anything. Like Casey, you do day-to-day support tickets. So like, but like, I like highlighting this because at AMZ United, I got to talk to a few other founders. Those that have far less revenue than we do, and 4 times the amount of the team size that we do. And this has been very intentional, right? Because we're bootstrapped, we didn't raise money, we've been profitable, which is great. It kind of forces you to make these certain types of decisions, right? Thinking through things of like, how does that scale, and how does that scale from a cost perspective? How do we build this in such a way that we don't need 3 people? We could get away with 1 person and it still do incredibly well. And what's nice is whenever you operate, make decisions based on that, when you do add a second person, that second person is just as efficient and scalable as the first. So I bring this up because I think more sellers need to be thinking through this lens, right? And we think through the lens of technology. Why? Because we're a tech company. We're a bunch of nerds, to be honest. And I say that as a positive. My stepson calls me a nerd all the time, or a geek. I don't think he means it in a positive way, but I do. I take it as a positive. And I really do think that more sellers need to think through that technology lens, right? Like, what tools should I be using? Not who's the next person I need to hire. That doesn't mean you don't hire people and build a team. You certainly do. But I think the way you go about scaling an e-commerce business is very much changing. Historically, though, it has been it's e-commerce, right? It's on the internet. Naturally, software comes into play. You have Shopify for brands, things of that nature. So you're already kind of by default, at least at a foundational level, thinking through this way, whether it's conscious or not. But I think you need to start being more intentional about these things, right? That doesn't mean you need to become a programmer, learn to code, anything like that. But it does mean that the first problem you have, you need to think through, how can I solve this with technology, not just give this over to my VA? I think that's a very easy crutch for people where they go, just outsource it. I don't think that should be the default. I think that should be like the last line of defense. The last line of defense as a human comes in and owns that particular outcome or task. Instead, that very first, solution there is like, well, what can I pay $100 for to solve this indefinitely and not have to think about it? And that really unlocks some leverage for sellers that when you start to think through this kind of consistently, naturally what's going to happen is you're going to get into tools like Zapier automations, right? Initially, you're just paying for software, it connects to something and it does the work for you. Then you start to think, well, what if I could connect X with Y? Because I always have this task that I have to do. Okay, let's take a look at Zapier. We can run some automations that we hand build. And then eventually you get further and further into that world. But the companies that are growing the fastest in our space are very data driven and very automation heavy. And I think that's just kind of a requirement. So hopefully more and more sellers will start to think through that lens and make better decisions for scalability purposes.
Yeah, it's always important to try and make calculated decisions, especially when they're driven by data. And we always talk about, there's so much data out there. How do you access it all? How do you kind of sift through BS data and find out the data that's most important and most impactful? That's always a task in itself. And then, especially focusing on areas that are going to make the greatest impact for you, delegating those other tasks, hopefully via tools and automation like we talked about before, and then opening that door for a VA or another employee or whatever that looks like when you get to the point where you either can't manage those tasks in addition to your daily tasks, or you just realize that there isn't really an automation or a tool out there that checks that box. So really finding that balance is essential to just overall performance. And then obviously that'll unlock growth as well.
Yeah. CG, I'm really glad you nerds exist to support those of us who aren't. I think we're all nerds. Again, I say this, positively, but we are glad we exist as well. I think, for us as a company, again, when people are like, how is Aura different? I love getting that question because I get it all the time. I rarely lead with a product. I start with the team because I'm like, listen, you get us. Like, not like hype us up too much, but like, there's not many companies where you're talking to Casey and like that's this guy right here and like he's in chat answering your support requests and helping you analyze products and your strategies and understand things, or you're scheduling an onboarding with Finn who's somewhere behind Casey right now, probably doing an onboarding right now. It does matter because every single person on the team is highly passionate about what we're doing and the people we're serving. And so it's cool. It's just a different way of operating, I think. But not many companies in the Amazon software space are that geeky. I think it's more just like, I have a job. That's kind of boring. You can have a job anywhere, right? Like you need to have some passionate kind of drive for what you're doing. So, but again, we're just kind of ranting here, having fun, kind of geeking out. If there's any specific questions anybody has, please throw those into the comment section. We're happy to dive deep into pretty much anything. Certainly a lot of things are kind of changing in the world. If I'm not mistaken, Amazon, I know UPS is attempting to add more robotics. My dad actually is a driver for UPS. They're unionized, so they're going to slow down a lot more before they go into the robotics age. But this is happening pretty fast. And I think I've mentioned this before, but my hope here is that by doing that, the efficiency goes up and the cost for storage goes down. So I'm hoping FBA fees can go down. Now, what is most likely to happen initially, if just not period, is the margins get fatter for Amazon and then they don't charge you less. I would not be surprised if that's the case, but at least listen, if efficiency goes up, that's still a good thing because you're getting things checked in faster, all these different things. It's kind of frustrating when you have your inventory at FBA then get transferred and you're like, cool, it's being transferred and processing for like 3 weeks solid. That's kind of annoying. So maybe the throughput will go up a little bit higher. I don't know. But again, my hope is these efficiency cost saving measures will translate to lower FBA fees, because what's happening is Walmart's really pushing for sellers. I mean, they're really investing. There was a meetup in Seattle that Amazon put on. It was completely free to go to. I think there was like 3,000 sellers. And they had VPs that were on the floor talking with everyone. So they're heavily investing in this in their third-party sellers. They're building out pretty fast. I saw this morning, I'm not sure if it's exactly related, but Walmart's creating the Walmart campus, kind of similar to like the Google campus. So I think Walmart's trying to lean more into that kind of tech vibe more so than they have historically. I think they've always been a tech company. They've always been at the forefront. They were one of the first, retail companies to have their own private satellites for data syncing back in the day. So they're still although you don't see it, very tech oriented. But I think the culture, they're trying to transition that to get more engineers to come on board and be happy there. So with that increased competition, I'm hoping through basic economics that that will incentivize Amazon to say, okay, we need to become more competitive here. We kind of just coasted and crushed it and done whatever we wanted to, because where else are you really going to just plug and play with demand? I'm thinking that's starting to change, and eventually that's going to change enough to become a catalyst for Amazon to say, okay, well, how do we keep our sellers here? And it's probably going to have to be on the fee side, because I think Amazon's relatively maxed out on demand. I don't think they can non-organically grow that. I think they're growing every single year, but so is all of ecom. So I think they're kind of tapped out there. And listen, their big drive is lowest price, right? I'm already hearing a lot of sellers talk about they're getting higher margins, lower volume, lower velocity certainly, but higher margins on Walmart. So, you know, you're kind of, again, you always have profitability and sales velocity as your two levers here. We always talk about this. So how's that play out? I'm hoping more competitiveness drives Amazon to make better decisions for sellers on the fee side, but who knows? It could honestly just play out to where it's a multi-channel play, right? And I've talked about this. I really think the future for sellers is multi-channel. I don't think it's one or the other. If you can sell on both, why not? But this creates another data problem, right? Like, how are you deciding, okay, I've got 100 units of SKU A. How many am I sending to Walmart? How many am I sending to Amazon? You really need to be quantitative there, because Amazon's going to give you more velocity. Walmart's going to give you more profitability. You really want to run that math on a particular SKU to understand what's the optimal here, because you don't want to give up too much profitability or velocity. So it's going to be a tough challenge, I think, for a lot of sellers. But this is where I kind of argue for more leaning into that tech, like I've been kind of harping on for years. Most sellers are not data analysts, like I'm not, right? Like, so how are you going to solve that problem? I think you're going to need software to solve that problem, if not just AI agents that can actually analyze things. Like, all right, cool. Here's the raw data of, like, you know, you can afford 100 units. I think you should send 40 here, 60 here, and like that's going to be optimal. And that's going to fluctuate, but like let's just get 80% of the way to optimized, and we're probably good to go. That's probably going to be the case. I just don't think that sellers have the capacity, if not just the raw energy, to go through every one of their SKUs and optimize each one individually. I just don't think that's going to work. Could you? Sure. Is it worth the time? I'm not sure. I mean, listen, if you're selling 1,000 SKUs, that could take countless hours to really get right. And do you even have access to the data to make that decision, or is it locked behind an API? That becomes its own problem. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, for sellers, you know, going into this kind of new e-com world, where things are kind of splitting and fractalizing out. But there again, anytime there's these kind of problems, there's the opportunity in the problem as well. I think if you can solve that, it becomes your competitive advantage. All the sellers that I see and know that are doing 10 plus mil a year consistently and consistently growing, they're thinking like this, right? They're saying, okay, things have changed. What does that mean for me? What am I going to do about that? And then they're just adapting and evolving rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because historically, I feel like there's really been three options for people trying to sell online. You either get your own Shopify storefront online, you sell through like your own brand, you sell on eBay, which we know is a totally different form of selling, auction based. Yeah. Obviously, there's the buy now option, but that was it. Right. And then Amazon being the third option, with Amazon kind of always changing those fees, and now Walmart becoming a serious player. I think multi-channel will be the future, and I do agree that Amazon is going to have to make adjustments on their end to become a more favorable option for sellers. Yeah, it'll be interesting just to see the split performance on those different marketplaces. Like you said, lower velocity right now, but probably higher margins on Walmart. Unsurprisingly, we always talk about, you know, the downward pressure on buy box prices on Amazon due to the high number of sellers. And I'm not positive. I don't want to make assumptions, but I feel like a lot of folks who are selling online are already in the Amazon space. Not to say that it's fully saturated yet, but if you're already there, you may start to look elsewhere for more, benefits, easier setup, whatever it may be. And Amazon might start losing new people joining the selling community as well. So, yeah, it'll
Yeah.
be interesting to see how Walmart continues to kind of grow and cater to new sellers or experienced sellers, and then the adjustments that Amazon will make in kind of
Mhm.
response to those updates from Walmart's side.
Yeah, and historically, when sellers have asked me, "Where do I go multi-marketplace or multi-channel?" I used to say, "Don't even worry about that until like you're literally capping out the opportunity on Amazon," because everything outside of Amazon was like little incremental changes, right? You could have one SKU on Amazon increase your bottom line by 30%. You got a new marketplace or new channel, it historically hasn't been that much, but I think that's changing, right? Again, things are evolving, so I think it does get to a point where it's kind of like start with both, right? Or start with one, really like understand the business if you're getting started for the first time, and then on the sooner side, consider going multi-channel. Um, I don't think it's if one end of the spectrum is don't do that, the other end is do it immediately. I think we're somewhere still closer to like focus on Amazon for now, but it has shifted closer to like we're going to like need to be multi-channel. So
Yeah.
see Gina. A lot of sellers are afraid to work with a repricer either because they made a bad previous decision or just don't understand. Your onboarding is great, but have you thought about having a basic SOP for beginners to help them get ready to benefit from your onboarding? So actually, yes. Casey, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, so I've been working specifically on getting more video content into our help articles, our help docs, kind of giving you folks as much as information and, for lack of a better term, not that everybody needs it, but some handholding to kind of help people get up and running there. Specifically, if you go to help.goaura.com, that's going to be our whole knowledge base of articles, setup things, but the quick start guide will lay out the 4 main steps for getting started. It's really connecting marketplace, creating a strategy, setting mins and maxes, and then enabling repricing. That quick start guide will link out to individual articles for all 4 of those steps. And all 4 of those do now have a hopefully video, or a hopefully pretty video, if you will, of me walking you all through that process. And I am going to continue to make more video content, create new articles with fresh video content and things of that nature. So if there are any areas where you're struggling, anything where you're looking like you may need a little advice or whatever it may be, please, ping in the comments here, come into support chat and let us know. That'll help me just prioritize what's going to be most impactful for all of you folks so that we can get new video content, or in the meantime, just a new help article to help point you folks in the right direction there. But yeah, that standard kind of process for getting set up. I would definitely recommend following that quick start guide with those individual articles for all those steps. And those videos and help articles are live right now. So you can jump in there, start checking out those videos. They're all on the shorter side as well. The create a strategy one, I think, is the longest one, right around the 5-minute mark. Just a little bit more details and information to cover in that one, but definitely recommend checking those out if you haven't already, just to make sure that you are set up for the best results depending on, your business goals, what you're trying to accomplish, things of that nature.
Yeah. So Gina, those are actually live now. We're just working on adding more. But yeah, to Casey's point, like we're trying to make these as to the point as possible so that they're not like, cool, I have to stay here for 20 minutes and like you're rambling. Like, no, like we're going to get to the point, like give you exactly what you need in a timely fashion. Like that was like one of our biggest like points in this project was like, let's make it as actionable as possible for the time possible. See Gina as well. Lots of concerns for sellers having all their eggs in one basket with all the suspensions lately. Yeah, we didn't really talk about this, but like the whole like risk portfolio approach, right? Like you're kind of diversifying. And I know Joseph Wheeler on Twitter exactly had this problem, right? Got suspended, immediately set up Walmart and started crushing Walmart. And now he's doing a ton on Walmart. And so, again, does Amazon start to pull back on these section 3s, these suspensions, because it's driving sellers to other marketplaces and they don't come back, or they don't come back to a higher enough degree? I don't think Amazon's going to care until it starts to affect the supply side of the marketplace. If they see that start to decline or have any kind of inclinations to do that, I think that will be a trigger, a catalyst for them. But we're talking like massive scale, right? So like in the community, we see these happening all the time. But if you zoom out to all of Amazon sellers, including brands and stuff like that, what percentage of these accounts are actually getting hit with Section 3s, and how's that impacting the supply side? It's probably not that much in reality. So, whether that happens or not, it just depends on the scale. But yeah, I think this is a really good point, right? Like you're really having what we call platform risk, meaning the platform Amazon could just be like, we don't like you anymore. Great, you don't have business now. And that is a risk. So I think even just from a risk perspective, to your point, at least having some familiarity, I can't speak today. I don't know why I can't say that word. Familiarity. Yeah, I can't do it. My Southern's coming out. With these other platforms like Walmart, I think is just a good thing to have in your back pocket. And you may not be scaling it. You're just having some stuff there, testing the waters, experimenting, just really getting to understand the subtle nuances between the two platforms. Probably a good use of your time.
Yeah, and I think we're just finally starting to see the fallout from the lawsuit and settlement from the summer that we saw, where I remember it was like baby blankets or toys, and then a whole other slew of, I think, like a hair dryer or something, a curling iron.
Yep.
Like it just covered a lot of different products. So if you are in an area or selling an item that may, have some sort of inherent risk tied to it, I think you do just want to make sure you're a little bit more careful doing your due diligence, that your products are verified. I'm not sure of all the bells and whistles or steps that you have to take care of on that side, but making sure that you do take care of them so that Amazon can trust you. Otherwise, they're going to begin to just cover themselves as opposed to focusing on providing for sellers, just like Dylan said, until it really starts to impact their supply. I mean, that would be the only reason why they would start to kind of become more relaxed on that policy, in my opinion. So, got to make sure that you're doing your own due diligence. But yeah, it's a good time to test out Walmart and just see how performance goes.
Yeah. Let's see. Question. How does the AI model, so Maven, handle FBA fee discounts and promotions? So specifically, we call these reduced profit ranges. So for the category specific ones, it automatically factors that in, both to if it's calculating your mins and maxes automatically, as well as the price itself. So it knows, okay, I'm not going to reprice in this range because the fee jumps to 15%. I'm going to lose money. But like once it goes, high enough, I can jump there and we're still good. So automatically happening for you in the background. No need to worry about that. Let's see, feedback on shipping fees. Amazon doesn't always show the lowest fee option with split shipments. Check each option and calculate. That part I'm not sure about. We don't factor in FBA inbound shipping stuff. That's like, in our opinion, that's more of a operational cost than it is like the gross margin at the high end with sales specific things. That could change, certainly. I know we've talked about it a lot internally, but that's going to be a different thing.
Yeah, just for some more clarification there, Aura will automatically account for your referral and fulfillment fees, but any shipping, prep, storage fees, really any additional fees you take on to sell an item, that should also be added to that cost field, just so Aura can take those figures into account when calculating your mins and maxes. Right now, Aura does only have the one cost field. It has been requested to potentially add an additional cost field, so we're potentially looking into adding that in the future. But for now, you'll just want to bake all of those costs to you into that one cost field, and that'll help Aura just be a little bit more accurate when calculating those min and maxes for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to help too, having that additional cost field. But you this is where you kind of have to put on your product hat and think through: is it one additional cost field or like an infinite number of added additional cost fields? Because you might want to have one and say, okay, this is my prep cost, it's $1, and then this is my merchant fulfilled shipping thing, but like only certain listings get that, of course. And so like when you really get into the weeds of it, it actually gets kind of complicated, and you really want to think through it from a scalability perspective. So I think like the naive answer is there's just one additional cost field, and like that would certainly like solve a lot of cases. But is that necessarily the best like solution there? So, but yeah, nice. Yeah, in terms of like all these lawsuits, I mean, man, it's kind of like never ending. I think the moment your company gets as big as Amazon has been, you're just asking for lawsuits. People just are like, hey, class action, We don't like you. It's like, all right, cool. You know, what does this mean? So I think that's creating a lot of pressure on Amazon, which is like unfortunately trickling down to sellers, and them having to become more strict on certain things, which is just frustrating. But it's just the scale of the operation.
Yeah.
See, Brian, are there any benefits of using the AI-based repricing versus buy box targeting, assuming your intention is volume of sales? Okay, so great question. Here's kind of how I tend to think through this question. I think through phases. So every new SKU, you don't really know what's going to work best until you start to experiment. So I kind of have these phases that I like people to work through. So phase one, apply Maven to it. So Maven's our AI model. If you're getting good enough velocity and profit margin, you can leave it and like you're good to go. That's going to work in most of the cases. Now you're still going to have cases where you actually need the velocity to be overvalued, right? So we always talk about these two levers. You have sales velocity and profitability. Maven's finding a balance between those as it's shifting, right? So your price could go up, down, all that good stuff, right? And we call that outcome the optimal price. Now, there are cases where you actually don't want to be balanced. You want to be higher on velocity and you're okay taking a lower profit margin. In that case, that's when I would go to that buy box targeting strategy. That would be kind of phase two, right? So I'm going to start with Maven, be like, cool, it's moving fast enough. I'm good here. Like profit margin's healthy. I'm satisfied. If I'm like, actually, I really want more velocity on this one, that's when I would go to the rule based. So you kind of have to think through what are you optimizing for. So like in the question, you're stating that the intention is higher volume of sales, so therefore sales velocity. In that case, I would actually default to buy box targeting because you know exactly what you want there. It's not to say that Maven couldn't give you the same amount of velocity. It's just that the buy box targeting strategy is really designed solely to do that. So the likelihood of you getting it is much higher than with Maven. But Casey, anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. I mean, my general recommendation, Brian, is if your main goal is profit margin, then to use Maven. If you are solely looking to target the buy box or win the buy box, Maven's not designed to win the buy box. We've talked about it a handful of times on office hours, just due to the number of sellers on Amazon, that always drives that buy box price down. So we found that Maven actually finds that optimal price to typically be slightly above the buy box price. Obviously, that is dependent from listing to listing, number of competitors, things of that nature. But if you are focused on margin, go with Maven. If you really want to be in the buy box or you're focused on sales velocity, that's when you're going to want to go to the buy box targeting strategy. And then when you get to a point where you may hit, long time storage fees or things like that, and you want to liquidate, we do actually have a help article for building a liquidation strategy. It's really just tweaking a couple settings within the buy box targeting strategy. So that's typically what I recommend there. And if you do go to our help article for building out the buy box strategy, we'll walk you through that, and the pre-configured settings in the buy box strategy when you build it in your account. Those are our best recommendations for winning the buy box already. So really the only thing you'll want to double check is just making sure those settings look good, but specifically that min and max price section will be where you want to make sure that those mins and maxes are in line with your expectations there.
Yeah. See, Gina, are you suggesting any changes in pricing strategies around Amazon's changes to inbound shipping dates being earlier than last year? Yes. So with basically the problem you're trying to avoid is you want to ship things in too early and then sell out and miss on Q4's amazingness, right? So with that, to counter what we just said about targeting a higher amount of sales velocity, you actually don't want to do that. So in that case, I would actually recommend defaulting to Maven, because you're still going to get really good profitability. And as the market is shifting up, which is going to in Q4, you're going to have a huge increase in demand. Supply is not going to change all that much relative to that, the variance in demand. You can get higher profit margins, right? So Maven's going to automatically do that for you, which is amazing because it's got that dynamic max, right? So as that's shifting up, it's shifting up with the market. So what's nice is I would actually recommend you to default to Maven on those, because if you are getting sales, you're getting sales at a really healthy profit margin in most cases. And as the Q4 kind of ramp up is occurring, you're taking advantage of that increase in profit margin and velocity. Now, as you get kind of towards the latter half of Q4, when things are starting to die down, and let's say you still have a lot of inventory left over for whatever reason, then I would switch over to something like a buy box targeting strategy so that you're really just inking out the most of sales velocity you can. You're still organically just going to get that because it's Q4. But what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to run out of stock, which is, again, the opportunity there is the supply just depleted, the demand's still kind of high, your price can go up and you can take advantage of that from a profit margin perspective, but eventually that demand will start to decline and you may want to ramp up your sales velocity. So my recommendation here is default to Maven until kind of like the last minute Q4, like into Q4. And then depending on where your inventory is at, that's what I might consider switching over, just become uber aggressive just towards the end there. So I don't have anything left over. Let's see here. What I meant is if I receive a promotion and a discount on FBA fees for a new shipment, increasing my profit margin, will the system automatically lower my price to be more competitive? Since I'm saving on FBA fees, will Maven see the discounted fees for FBA when adjusting the new price? Okay, so yes. So we are getting the fees, the FBA fees. So if those are changing in your account, that should be changing in the API. We are getting that. Are we lowering your price because of that? Not necessarily, because we may not need to, right? Like if you're still getting healthy sales at $30 and you just save $5 per unit in fees, as an example, there may not be a reason to take you down to $25, right? Like you're still getting healthy sales at 30, you just made more margin. Why reduce that margin, right? So the thing we want to be aware of here is like, just because you had a nice bump in margin doesn't mean we immediately want to remove that from your profit margin. Like we want you to get that, right? Like, so could we? Yes. Like how we're calculating your min values would change. Absolutely. Right. So as an example, if we're calculating your min values at $30 and your fees went down by $5 per unit, could we take the min value down to 25? Certainly. But that does not guarantee that your price is going to go down, your sell price, because it may not need to. It could, which is nice, right? Like it's nice to have that extra kind of range just in case. But it's not a guarantee that we're going to take your price down because, again, we may not need to. And like, why deplete the added margin if we don't have to? I'd rather you still get healthy velocity and just 5% more margin for doing nothing. That's always a good thing.
Yeah, Maven will take in that additional margin into account, but it's not, like you said, Dylan, going to tank or drop your price immediately. With it kind of looking for that balance of sales velocity and margin, it'll probably take that into account, maybe make some more price adjustments and kind of continue to learn on that listing. But specifically on rules-based strategies in that scenario, we'll recognize the fees via the API, like Dylan mentioned, but it's still just going to obey your rules-based settings. So that won't automatically affect your price. The rules-based are always going to be dependent on the competitive landscape of a listing there.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Good question, though. I like that question. That's the fun part about what we do. There's a lot of these subtle nuances and these little detail variables and stuff. So I like these kind of questions because it just helps users wrap their head around like what we do a little bit more, especially in like these really granular scenarios. But hey, if you get an extra discount on FBA fees, that's always a good thing. It doesn't happen that often, so that's definitely a good thing. Yeah, so I'm hoping, right after Q4, you got Returnary, right? So hopefully it's not that bad. So I think one thing to really be considering right now too is like, don't just be looking at ramping up your inventory. Look at the historical data if you have access to it for returns. Like if you just know it's going to be a high return thing, but you're going to get a ton of sales, like run the math. Is it still worth it? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's always kind of frustrating when new sellers especially go through their first Q4 and they're like, I crushed it. And then January hits and like, oh my gosh, half my sales just got returned. Like, yeah, sorry. So like you really need, and again, we talk about data all the time, making data-driven decisions. This is a great area to make one of those decisions. You should be looking at your categories. There's just certain categories that are going to have a higher return rate in January than others are. Again, that's not to say that you shouldn't sell in those categories. You probably should, but you kind of need to look at the math and kind of estimate, okay, well, if I can move X number of units and this percentage will be returned, is it still worth my capital? Because not enough sellers are thinking about the opportunity costs of their capital. And what I mean by that, if you're not familiar with the concept of opportunity cost, it means if I spend $50 here, I can no longer spend that same $50 over here. Therefore, this place that I spent the $50 has to have a higher ROI than over here, right? And so not enough sellers were thinking about this concept of, well, it looks profitable, I'm just going to buy it. Okay, that's fine, but most sellers have limited capital, right? Even if you have 100 grand, if you're really good at sourcing, you should have more than 100 grand worth of things to purchase. You're going to have to make trade-offs. So just because it's profitable and looks great on paper doesn't mean it's the right decision when you compare it to where else you could have spent that $50 as an example. So again, when you're talking about capital expenditures, things of that nature, I really want more of you to start thinking through that opportunity cost lens. And a simple thing to do this, I did this with my wholesale account when I was growing that. I would lay out everything I could purchase and I would organize it by ROI and volume. And so now what I can do is I can have this ranking thing, right? And I would just go top to bottom. So some things that were profitable didn't get purchased because why am I buying a 12% ROI thing when I just added a 20% ROI thing, which is my next lowest, right? And so what I'm trying to do is build up this list, and I ideally want to purchase 100% of it, but I have to have a high velocity of churning my capital, high enough ROI on average to return more dollars to me to then go back into the system. So ideally, month one, I'm only ordering 80% of what I could have. But month three, I'm ordering 100% of what I could have because those dollars in the ROI in my profit got pushed back into the machine, into the system. And that's how you're able to compound your growth relatively fast. So it's a good thing to do. Doing this with OA and RA is definitely much harder because you're dealing with such higher SKU counts. You're dealing with so much variation and buy costs and ROI. Wholesale is where I have the most experience, and it's just a little bit easier when I got 20 SKUs to choose from. That's an easy Excel formula for sure to run that on. But do that. If you're using Inventory Lab, Seller Board, whatever, export your data. All I would do is look at what did I actually sell? Like, what's the volume of units I actually sold? And I might limit that. Might look at like the last 3 months average per month kind of a thing. So I can say, okay, for the next month, how much can I move on average? What's my actual profitability on that? And then that calculation gives you a number, and then you stack rank it and you just sort it highest to lowest. And you say, okay, cool. Where should my capital actually go? This will also let you know, do you need more capital, right? Do you have too much capital available and not enough inventory to purchase? Okay, well, don't focus on opening up a new Plum card. Go actually spend more time sourcing. Or do you have the inverse problem, which ideally you should? I would rather you have, not enough capital and a ton of profit or a ton of potential inventory and products to purchase, so that when the capital does come back to you with a profit, you can immediately spend it. You want to be spending the day it lands. You want to be firing off orders, whether that's, online orders, POs, what have you. Because what you don't want to run into is you're like, I got 50 grand cash in, it's just sitting here and I have nothing to purchase. That is non-efficient capital that is not earning you anything. If you haven't read the book, oh gosh, of course, I think about it in the immediate blank. The Richest Man in Babylon. It's a great personal finance book wrapped up in allegory. But it basically, it uses language that's not really appropriate these days. But it basically talks about how every one of your dollars is a worker. And if it's not working to earn you more, that's a lazy worker, right? You would fire that person. So if you have capital that's sitting around, you have lazy workers and you need to put them to work. It's your job. So good book, just highlighting that, but it just came to mind. It's a really good analogy for what we're talking about here. Let's see. One of my SKUs is currently priced at $15.10 for 2 days with Maven, but my minimum is set to $11. Can you explain why this might be happening, especially since pricing at $14.99 would give me a higher profit margin and ROI? It's hard to say. These are the tough questions because I need to look at like all the data. What I would say is reach out to support with that SKU in that same question and let us take a deeper dive. We'll tell you exactly what's happening there. That will definitely help. trying to think here. Most likely, there's no reason to drop the price down. But yeah, reach out to support.
Yeah, I'd say there's two common scenarios. Obviously, it may not be one of these two things. One, you may be out of stock with items not fulfillable, at which case you'd be holding it at whatever that max price is. I'm not sure if you've set 1510 as your max price, or if you're having Maven auto calculate that. That's typically the most common reason for why really any listing would be sitting around with no price updates for a handful of days. The other would be just based on the competition observed and the data collected on that listing, that 1510 is that best price for that combo of velocity and margin. Maven just takes so many different factors into account all at once. So even though if your margin may be better at $14.99, there may be some other factors that Maven's kind of taking into account, determining that 11-cent higher price point. But yeah, I definitely recommend reaching out to the chat support right now. Finn is running that. And if he's not able to find you a quick answer, I'm sure I can find you one in about 25 minutes when we jump off here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. I have seen 17% higher sales and 15% more profit in the last 2 weeks. I've started using Aura. This is amazing. Love hearing that. This is why we do what we do, right? This is the whole concept. And this is why when I spoke at AMZ United, I talked about how we kind of need to change how we're defining success with repricing. Because historically, we've done one of two things. My sales went up or my buy box ownership percentage went up. Typically, those two things happen together. The issue with that is I don't know if that's good or bad. Because if I lower your prices by 20%, you're going to get in the buy box more and you're going to get more sales. But are you happy? No, you just lost all your margin in theory. So I'm glad you mentioned both of these, because I think this is really highlighting what we've been working on, right? When we talk about this optimal price, especially for Maven, that's what we're trying to do, right? Like these two opposing forces, and they are opposing, sales velocity and profit margin. Well, what's frustrating about that is the fact that they're opposing, right? If you say, Dylan, give me both, it's actually a really hard thing to do, because you have to think about this on like a chart, right? You have these two lines and they oppose one another. Eventually what's going to happen is as your velocity continues to rise, your profit margin is going to go down and vice versa. So what we try to do is say, okay, well, there's always a point at which both these lines cross. That is the optimal price. And this optimal price is shifting as the dynamics of the marketplace of those listings of your competition are also changing and evolving. And so our challenge is calculating that crossover point as often as possible in real time, and then saying, okay, cool, what does this mean? Where do we need to go? What price changes do we need to make? Because you don't just want more sales, but you also don't just want more profit margin, because as the profit margin goes up, your sales velocity goes down. That's not really good either, because now you got long-term storage fees. And so I think we need to have more of these kind of conversations but you can get a little bit more of both, but it's in the how you do it that really makes it important, right? Like you can't just say, Dylan, give me both. It's like within reason I can, but there are give and takes. On some listings, you're going to have a pullback in velocity, but a massive increase in profit margin. On others, it's going to be the inverse that's occurring. But if we can have more and more of our listings at this optimal value, we're getting the best outcome we possibly can, considering both sales velocity and profit margin. But like, to our earlier conversation with another user here, there are times when you want to over-index on velocity, and you're like, I'm okay giving up some profit margin here because of whatever scenario you're in. But I think the default should be this outcome. This is the outcome we want. Higher sales and profit margin, not just my sales went up 30%. I don't know if that's good. I can't celebrate that quite yet, because if your margin went down 40%, I'm not happy with that outcome. This outcome, I'm very happy with. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Definitely super exciting. And hopefully you did that in your free 2-week trial before even giving us a credit card, because that makes me even more happy, because that means it paid for itself. And that's the whole point here, right? When you jump into a tool like a repricing tool, you should be able to run a test. And if it did not make you more than what you would have paid to use it, it's probably not a good fit or a good time. Maybe it's too early, who knows? But this kind of outcome, love it. This gets me hyped. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the ideal scenario there. Raising both of those factors is what we're absolutely aiming for.
Yeah, 1000%. And, we talked about this downward pressure, right? What we mean by that is when you have an increase in competition, economically speaking, you're going to have a lot of supply side, but the demand side hasn't changed. Therefore, the price has to come down. That downward pressure is what we're talking about. So what ends up happening in a lot of cases is you have almost too much velocity, but you're giving up too much profitability. And so instead, what Maven can do is actually slow down that velocity just a bit, but increase the profit margin quite a bit. So you're actually not trading that much velocity for an increase in profitability. I mean, think about this, right? Like if we could, let's say as an example, we slow down velocity by 5%, but we increase the profit margin by 15%. It's pretty good. Think about that, what that does to your bottom line, and you're really not taking a hit. Yeah, you're ordering a little bit less, but not that much. So we're trying to maximize ultimately, I think this is a good thing for people to think about. It's not just the ROI, right? ROI is nice and it's a good efficiency measure. But you should also be looking at the dollars returned. Like when I have my sourcing checklist for wholesale, I said I want a minimum of 30% gross ROI and at least $4 in gross profit. I wanted both because the dollars were nice to let me know, could I afford doing things like PPC ads? Because those are measured in dollars, not percentages for the most part. Yeah, you have tacos and ACOs and all that stuff, but still, like you're paying dollars or cents to get sales in dollars back. And there's a minimum threshold, right? If I'm getting 50% ROI, but I'm only making 20 cents, can I really afford PPC? No. Like there's a critical threshold of dollars for that to even be possible, to even run an experiment on. So, I think measuring ROI is a really nice way to measure the efficiency of spending your capital, but the dollars coming back lets you know how fast you can redeploy that capital, right? Because again, 50% ROI sounds great, but if you're only spending $1,000 a month, how fast can you get to spending 50 grand a month? Well, it's much slower than if you're already spending 20 grand a month at 10% ROI, right? Like you kind of have to think through that lens. So I would also look at the dollars coming back into your account. It's not just the percentages. And this is where it gets tough in these conversations because these are the nuances that I've been talking about. You can't just have a singular KPI that you measure and say, well, if I'm hitting this, I'm good. Not necessarily. There was a time when I was really scaling up because I was limited by capital, right? So I was like, okay, well, to basically scale faster, I need to look at the dollars coming back, but I need to also look at my average ROI for every single month of what I'm buying, right? So like I would start to switch out, and I've already mentioned this, I would switch out something making me 10% ROI, which was my lowest ROI item, because I just added a new product that does 15% ROI. Great. I'm going to negate that because the opportunity cost, I'm going to buy this. When the capital comes back, I'll redeploy it into that bottom one again. So like you kind of got to do both, which is like super frustrating. But this kind of comes with running a business, right? Like you really have to look at both things. And so like, how did I hack the dollars coming back? I started to look at the average sell price of the things I was purchasing, right? So, because again, 20% of $100 is a lot more than 20% of a $20 item. So I both wanted to raise the average sell price of the SKUs I was carrying and the average ROI of those SKUs I was carrying. If I'm doing both of these, I'm getting really high leverage on my capital. Sometimes you can only do one or the other, but if you can do both, that's great. So, I started to say for wholesale, I'm not buying anything less than $100 retail. And if I could do that, I'm pretty good because the margins roughly are the same, which is so crazy to think about, right? Like your wholesale margins are relatively consistent as the price goes up and down. I mean, to a certain degree, it's going to lower, of course. But I could buy something for $116 wholesale, sell it for $359, or I could buy something for $10 and sell it for $15. Right? Like I can either get $50 in profit or I can get $5 in profit, but it's the same ROI. Yeah, it costs me more dollars to purchase that, of course, but that's the whole point, right? Like you really want to think through kind of how efficient your capital is being deployed. Let's see, how best can we come up with a strategy for FBM items for total cost? The question is, how do I gauge the shipping on each item on the strategies seem, I as the strategy seemed grouped by weight, since the total cost would need COG plus shipping for Aura to reprice. Am I understanding this correctly? How have others approached this? Casey, I know you have we talk about this a lot. I'll let you
Yeah,
rip on this one.
there's a couple different things you can do here, your Sears. So as we mentioned, I'm not sure if you just joined the call here or just getting set up, but Aura will account for your referral and fulfillment fees in that cost field. You are correct. Any shipping, prep, additional fees will need to be added to that cost field as well, especially FBM items where you are probably taking on that shipping cost. The two most common workarounds or things users will do in similar situations will be, one, they'll create or calculate a range of their typical shipping costs and then lean towards the higher end of that range and apply that to all of their listings. That's going to do two things. One, it's going to obviously factor in that shipping for you, but two, at the very least, it's going to protect your margins by leaning to the higher end of that scale, if you will, as opposed to if you go in the middle or maybe too low, you may end up trimming those margins too thin on some lower priced items. In that scenario, the other option you have, if you want to have Aura continue to set your min and maxes automatically, what some folks will do just to account for the missing shipping costs in that cost field, they'll actually just increase their desired ROI or margin percentage, whatever it may be, to factor in those missing costs. So if you're typically looking for, let's say, a minimum ROI of 20%, maybe you bump that up to anywhere from 24, maybe a couple percentage points higher, just to make up for those missing costs. So those are the two typical approaches that people will take on the FBM side of things, whether it's creating that range, leaning towards the higher side and adding it to the cost field, or having that ROI percentage be slightly higher to factor in for the somewhat inaccurate costs there.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
I think I've mentioned it before on office hours. We occasionally talk about TV shows, video games, movies, things like that. Whenever we talk about the optimal price, I always think of those old sports games where you could be managing your team and you could play with concession prices to try and find the best combo of margin and then velocity, and you can check back week to week. And man, I think that sweet spot was always $5 for hot dogs. That's what I always found.
And in 2024, it's $20.
Yeah.
Thanks, inflation. See, follow up here. Why not add in additional cost fields? So we did talk about this earlier. This is something we're heavily considering, but kind of thinking through how to do that best, because it's not just like one additional cost, although that's an area or a route we could go. There's a lot of different things, right? Like there's FB or MFN shipping costs. There's maybe factoring in FBA inbound costs per unit. There's also prep costs, all kinds of different things. So we are thinking through that.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing with building any product, right? You don't want to push out a solution that doesn't cover as many scenarios as possible. So trying to weigh the options, see what's going to be the easiest or make the best impact for everybody before we start making big changes. I know we made a big change before I jumped on for, was it small and light fees, and put that in the platform, and then Amazon stripped them away like a couple weeks after that update was made. So just trying to make sure that we, focus on things that are making big impacts and releasing them at a time that are gonna, simplify things for everybody.
I wish they would give us more of a heads up, like, hey, by the way, in 60 days, like, or something. I mean, they gave us a little bit of a heads up, but not much in terms of like a roadmap of like, hey, by the way, like Q4 of next year, that's going to go away. We're like, all right, cool. Like, we're just not going to work on that because it's going to go away, and like it's just going to suck in the meantime. But like, that's the right decision in the long run. We'll focus on our time somewhere else. Here's me wishing. So just funny enough, like the struggles that sellers deal with, we deal with similar struggles, just in a very different way. So we're all in the same boat, which is awesome. We're the same boat on the same ocean, going the same direction. So yeah, definitely all in this together. That's for sure. We did recently, so every Monday we release a blog post. This week, if you go to goaura.com/blog, I talk about reimbursement services. Turns out a lot of sellers don't use these, which is kind of crazy to me. They're just doing it manually. To me, that's kind of like manually repricing your products. Like, what are you doing? This is like a solved problem. Because what's nice about it is like, there's no costs. It's all on performance, right? So they're like, we're going to take 20% of whatever we get back. It's like, great. So you have nothing to lose. It's one of the few like services you should just have as early as possible. Because you have nothing, like, you're not coming out of pocket, right? It's just whatever they're getting back. So even if you do it too early, yeah, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it really doesn't. And you just have that second pair of eyes that's like going through finding things. So I basically walk through like, here's how to do it yourself, just so you understand the process. But also here's like the top services that I recommend and I think are great. And like how to think about it and all the good stuff. But that was a blog post we did earlier this week that a lot of people seem to like, which is nice. There's a lot of tools and services that you just don't need for a long period of time, and there's things that you need as early as possible because things happen. And I just think that reimbursement services definitely, should be on the sooner side. Nice. So we're going to start wrapping up here for time. We'll give it a few more minutes. So any other last questions we can dive deep into? Would love to do that before we wrap up. So just go ahead and throw those into the comment section, but appreciate everybody making the time, joining us live here, asking some amazing questions, and even just saying hello. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's always fun to have these little conversations, and leading up to Q4 as well. If there's any, topics you want us to focus on or any things that are top of mind, as always, feel free to throw it in the comments here. Let me know via chat, and we can kind of have some, subjects semi-prepared jumping into the conversation or scheduled office hours. Obviously, we'll still kind of keep it open-ended, free-flowing. But if there's anything that you're concerned about, or you're going through your first Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Q4, happy to jump into anything that is top of mind. Also, I'm sure Dylan would love any sort of ideas or direction for blog content as well. So if there's anything that's top of mind there as well, just always let us know. We're more than happy to be flexible and talk about things that are going to be, informative and helpful for you folks kind of leading into this big final stretch of the year here.
Yeah. See, Gina recently switched to TrueOps, and they're great at much lower cost per reimbursement. Awesome. We'll have to take a look at them. I don't think I've heard of them actually. TrueOps, huh? Reimbursement. Yeah, we'll give them a shot here and check them out. I've not. This is the crazy thing. There's so many new ones that get created. It's like prep centers, right? Like there's some that are just amazing, but there's so many new ones, and it's kind of crazy. Okay, so Gina, basically the new kind of startup checklist. If you go to help.goer.com. Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but we just called it the quick start guide, right?
Yep. I'm actually pulling it up on my end right now, and I can paste it in the chat for you, Gina. And like I mentioned, this specific quick start guide won't have videos in itself, but if you look up the individual articles for each of those steps, so that's going to be connecting marketplace, setting mins and maxes, creating a strategy and enabling repricing, those specific articles will all have those videos in there. Just since it is one of the more important things, I'll actually link creating a strategy video in there for you as well, just so that is good to go.
Awesome.
Let's see here. And that's the create a strategy video there. I did also, if anyone has a lot of SKUs or listings that they manage on a daily basis or weekly basis, I did recently update our uploads article as well. That's the best way to make bulk changes to your listings. So this is a nice way to kind of just get a walkthrough of, how to download that template, managing it in Excel or Google Sheets, and then re-uploading it. Once you start dealing with more than, I would say, 50 listings, it gets pretty tedious to manage them on the listings page. So that article will help you kind of speed up that process as well.
Awesome.
A couple troubleshooting tips in there as well. So
awesome. So we're going to wrap it up there. Appreciate everybody making the time to join us here, ask amazing questions, and even just kind of listen in and hang out with us. We do this every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST, unless we otherwise notify you. Feel free. Share it with your friends. Come join us. Don't feel like you have to wait to ask us questions, though. Please reach out to support in real time if you have questions so we can help you on the sooner side. Always available. You're going to talk with Casey or Finn in that support channel. And if you have not scheduled an onboarding session, please reach out to support and schedule that. It's 20 minutes. It's free. All we do is we jump into your account, make sure everything's set up correctly. Especially if you're a newer seller getting started with repricing for the first time, it can feel overwhelming. We can take you from that overwhelming feeling to you feel like a superhuman in like 20 minutes. And we do this daily at this point. So definitely do that. But with that, we'll let you get back to the rest of your week. Enjoy it. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Have a good week, folks.